The hits just keep on coming against P. Diddy, with a string of new civil lawsuits filed against the embattled music icon just this week. But Diddy isn't the only one who's facing some major allegations. Two of his sons, Justin and Christian Combs, are both name-dropped in several civil suits that list Diddy as a defendant. And the accusations against them are pretty serious, ranging from drugging victims and sexually assaulting them to apparent involvement in a shooting. We're breaking down all the allegations against both sons and speaking with former federal prosecutor Neama Rahmani about whether they could face criminal charges. I'm Gillespie, and this is Law&Crime News. The allegations against 54-year-old Sean Diddy Combs have dominated headlines for more than a month, and he's spent most of that time at the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, held on some pretty severe federal charges. Just last month, he was indicted by a grand jury on charges of racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, and transportation to engage in prostitution. By now, you're familiar with the allegations against Diddy, from gun and drug trafficking to running a years-long sex trafficking scheme. There's honestly too many allegations against him to list. According to some reports, there are thousands of people who say they were assaulted by Diddy. All that remains to be seen, but we do know there are more than a dozen civil suits already filed against him, with more than 100 new suits expected to follow. The pattern throughout all these lawsuits is eerily similar. Diddy and his team would allegedly drug or spike the drinks of victims before Diddy and sometimes others sexually assaulted them. There are also allegations that Diddy forced these victims to have sex with prostitutes as he touched himself. He called these situations freak-offs, and oftentimes he recorded them. Here's where some of the allegations against his son Justin Combs come in. So all this takes us back to February, when Rodney Jones, also known as the producer Lil Rod, filed civil suit against Diddy. In his lengthy lawsuit, Lil Rod straight name drops Justin Combs, describing him as someone who solicits prostitutes, underage girls, and sex workers. There's actually a picture of Justin Combs with an allegedly underage girl shown in the lawsuit. Now, in this specific instance, Lil Rod alleges at least one underage girl came to Diddy's home for a listening party. A sex worker was also apparently solicited, and a freak-off ensued. As an aside, this is the same night that Lil Rod alleges Diddy forced him to take a laced shot. He started to feel lightheaded and then woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning, naked next to a sex worker. It's important to note Justin Combs is listed as a defendant on this case because, according to Lil Rod, he facilitated Diddy's alleged RICO enterprise and at times participated. Okay, I know you're multitasking when you're watching our videos, but if you're out and about running errands, listen up. I have to tell you about the free app Upside that gives you cash back on daily essentials. I use it every time I pump gas because it's so easy and free, so why not? All you have to do is get the Upside app and claim an offer for whatever you're buying. So you pay as usual and then just follow the steps on the app to get paid. To find out how much you could earn, click the link in the description to download Upside or scan the QR code on the screen and use our promo code LCNews to get an extra 25 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. Lil Rod's civil suit points to more accusations against Justin Combs, too, for his involvement in an alleged shooting cover-up. According to court documents, it happened on September 12, 2022, outside Diddy's Chalice Studios. Lil Rod says Diddy, his son Justin, and Justin's friend who went by G were all there when things got heated. Lil Rod says he heard multiple gunshots ring out and later found G on the bathroom floor in the fetal position. Lil Rod says he was bleeding out of his hip and leg area. Lil Rod says he was applying pressure to G's wounds and then asked the crowd to call an ambulance. At that point, both Diddy and Justin Combs disappeared to another part of the studio. Diddy then gave strict instructions to inform the police that he had nothing to do with the shooting. He also forced Mr. Jones to lie to the police by telling them that G was shot standing outside the studio by a drive-by assailant. So that specific allegation involves Diddy's son Justin, but another allegation and entirely separate civil lawsuit involves his other son, Christian, or King Combs. Grace Omar K. alleges that Christian Combs sexually assaulted her on a yacht in December 2022, and she says it was facilitated by Diddy. Diddy had rented the yacht around Christmas time, and Omar K. says it was a revolving door of high-profile celebrities and sex workers who were often passed out on the ship's deck. The lawsuit says there were liquor bottles all over, and it was difficult to distinguish which ones were laced with drugs. Omar K. alleges that on December 28, 2022, while working as a yacht deckhand, she was sexually assaulted by a heavily intoxicated Christian Combs, who physically assaulted her and allegedly forced her to perform oral sex on him. Since these suits were filed, both Justin and Christian Combs were seen in federal court at their father's appearance just last week. But could they too face charges? Here's where we bring in former federal prosecutor Neama Rahmani. So, talking about P. Diddy, I know we're talking about the crazy amount of allegations against him that are pretty shocking just unto themselves. But then there's also two of his children whose names have come up a bit throughout some of these civil lawsuits. We've seen headlines, both Justin and Christian Combs. Just to start right off the bat, what are you thinking about that? The inclusion of both of Diddy's sons and the accusations against those two?
I think that if we're talking about additional charges and additional defendants, those are probably two of the more likely. And Christian, of course, was the subject of a civil lawsuit where there was a sexual assault allegation naming him directly. So I think if we're going to cast a bit of a wider net, people are talking about family members, other celebrities, maybe some employees like Christina Horan, but I think the most likely would be those two sons.
Why do you think it's the most likely about those two? Just because of the recordings, the allegations against him? What are you thinking?
I think so. I think obviously they're just civil allegations, and those cases are going to be put on hold while the criminal case plays out. But there is some smoke there, and obviously, there's a presumption of innocence, and there's a lower standard in a civil case. But you have someone who's been named directly as someone who participated in a sexual assault, and everything else has been rumors and speculation. But here, you at least have one verified complaint.
And you know what's interesting about this situation? It's the sexual assault civil allegation filed by Grace Omar K. This is against Christian Combs, as you're referring to it. And Diddy is a co defendant in this case because she says he facilitated it. It was on a yacht that Diddy had rented. But it was Christian, the one who allegedly sexually assaulted her. I mean, so how does all of that relate? The fact that we have Diddy, who's also part of this, but it's mostly on Christian in this instance?
Yeah, in this particular instance, like you said, it did take place on a yacht. She was someone who was working at the time, and Little Rod was there apparently, and obviously he's a plaintiff in a civil lawsuit himself. But whenever you are a plaintiff in a civil case, you obviously want to go after someone with the ability to pay. That's what we call a deep pocket. So even though Diddy might not have personally participated in this alleged incident, you really want to wrap him in as a co-defendant because obviously his ability to pay any judgment is going to be very different than Christian or Justin or any of the other of his seven children.
Do you think that Grace Omar K, the plaintiff in this yacht criminal or civil lawsuit, rather, do you think that the feds would reach out to her and ask her about her experience, perhaps?
I do, and this is why apparently, and obviously I haven't heard him, she has recordings of this incident, audio recordings, and we know how powerful video evidence is. We've talked about it with Cassie Ventura and how that really maybe even shift the direction of this case entirely because of course Combs denied everything until CNN got a hold of that video in May. And we're talking about a lawsuit that was filed in April, I believe. And again, I don't know if it's true, but the allegations are that much of this was recorded and there's audio recordings. And if so, and she's saying no, and Christian is moving forward anyway, then you have attempted sexual assault.
Talking about audio and video recordings, that's what's huge in this case. I mean, we heard a lot about it from Cassie in her lawsuit, then, of course, Lil Rod, and now confirmed in the federal indictment that the feds are saying, yep, we've got some. And that's what led to this indictment and his charges. But what's interesting is that in Lil Rod's lawsuit, he actually has photos, like screenshots of a recording of Justin Combs, and he says it's allegedly with a sex worker. Do you think that part is incriminating too, that the feds may be looking at that recording?
I do. And during Combs' initial appearance before the new judge, Subramanian, there was some discussion of this, and Christian and Justin were in court as well, supporting their father. But the feds were talking about the 96 different electronic devices they seized and the terabytes and terabytes of data. Now, some of it might not be relevant, but some of it may be very much on point because going back to Cassie's original allegation, Combs reportedly recorded many of these sex acts. It might have been for his sexual pleasure. It might have been to maintain control over the participants. But whether it's a voluntary recording, whether it's a hotel security camera, whether it's something that Lil Rod, took in a still video or a recording, or whether it's something that, a civil plaintiff, a victim of sexual assault, I try not to name them, even though she did out herself in the complaint, uh, took without the knowledge of Christian or others. It's all very, very powerful because oftentimes when you're dealing with sexual assault and sexual abuse, these are things that happen behind closed doors, right? Could be at a home, could be at a hotel. In this case, could be on a yacht. And usually there aren't a whole lot of witnesses to it. So you will have a he said, she said type situation in many, many cases. Well, a recording can really change that narrative because, again, it can really corroborate the story of one side or the other.
In regards to Justin specifically and these alleged recordings, audio, all of that. So that's in relation to Lil Rod's lawsuit. He's actually a co-defendant listed quite a few times throughout this. And in addition to him sitting next to this alleged prostitute, we have that photo. There's also allegations that he actually partook in these freak offs and potentially drugged women. This is something Lil Rod is saying. How would the feds go about proving something like that? I know that's the pattern we've seen across a lot of these civil suits that women allege Diddy, for instance, drugged them. But now Lil Rod's also pointing the finger at Justin Combs, saying he drugged some of these women. How would the feds then go to look further into that?
Yeah, Lil Rod's lawsuit is interesting in that there are many defendants. We talked about Christina Horam, right? Some of the allegations that came out in Lil Rod's lawsuit was Christina, of course, being Combs's right-hand woman. She allegedly had the fanny pack with the drugs that were provided to the sex workers. There are the allegations directly against Justin as well. So whenever you're proving something like this, obviously you're going to rely on the testimony of witnesses. It could be independent witness because the sex workers, even though they're participants in a sex act, they won't necessarily be charged, or I don't think they're going to be defendants in the lawsuit if the allegation is that they were forced to perform these sex acts and it wasn't just a commercial transaction. So you can rely on that testimony. Obviously Lil Rod himself, but he's a plaintiff, so his testimony may be biased, may be true, but it's certainly something that you would want more of if you are a prosecutor. And then you look to video and you look to other types of evidence, maybe text messages, something that corroborates what Lil Rod has said. And of course, if you have someone like Horam who flips, that would be very, very helpful for prosecutors because we know that former employees, they usually have a lot of information and they can be leveraged in a criminal case or even a civil one to cooperate to save themselves.
I want to talk more about that, the flipping of all of this, because right now Diddy is the only one who has been charged federally in relation to this scheme, this alleged scheme. But as you pointed out, there are other people who have been identified as participants in all this. Christina Coram obviously is the main one, along with the Combs enterprise or empire, whatever you want to call it. She has not yet been charged, but I'm pretty sure, as you've told me in the past, probably this interview and many others, the feds are going to be talking to Christina Coram, and it would be in her best interest, likely, to cooperate with them. But what about Justin and Christian? I mean, they're so close to Diddy. They're his sons, and they have accusations against them. They could, as you said, face these charges in the future. What do you think? Do you think that they would flip?
I think it's a lot less likely that Justin and Christian would flip. I've seen children testify against their parents. We've seen it on Law and Crime many times, and obviously it makes for great drama and courtroom theatrics. But I think in a case like this, it's going to be less likely. They really owe everything to their father, right? He's obviously someone with significant financial means. He's someone that's going to pay for their lawyers and protect them. I think it would be pretty surprising to see a flip like that. Of course, anything's possible, but I think it's less likely given that there are people that really don't have that familial tie. They don't have their legacy. They don't have potentially hundreds of millions of dollars to lose if they end up turning sideways on their parents. So it's obviously a possibility. I think it's highly unlikely, especially what we saw during that first hearing. The children all being in court, directly supporting Combs, him waving and blowing kisses to them. I think a flip is unlikely with respect to Justin and Christian.
Yeah, what do you make of that? Obviously, they're supporting their father, as you've discussed. They were actually in the courtroom supporting him, as you said, blowing kisses, all of that. But then there's also headlines, photos, videos of Christian Combs, who's been out partying after all this. People are obviously clamoring at any sort of Diddy news. But do these two have to kind of keep in mind that the focus is going to be on them? They are being watched, I mean, in relation to what their dad was doing, but also their allegations against them. I mean, is this something they should be keeping in mind, their public image?
I do, Sierra, and it's not just about the courtroom. We've talked about the court of public opinion in a case like this, and the jurors are ordinary people, and everyone knows who Sean Diddy Combs is. And if there's this sort of uh, very high-profile criminal trial happening in May or sometime in 2025, and the perception is that the family doesn't take this seriously, they're partying, they're drinking, it really plays into some of the allegations that this was just a party lifestyle, and these individuals thought that they were above the law. Now, again, I'm not saying that jurors don't follow the instructions in the law, and they're really supposed to decide the case solely based on the facts and evidence in the case. But we've seen it time and time again. It could be Johnny Depp, it could be Michael Jackson. Whenever you have someone who's high profile, and the narrative, the public perception, the PR really machine goes in one way, it can really help shape the opinions in the courtroom as well.
So we've talked about these sexual assault allegations that are against both Justin and Christian. But there's another incident that's pointed out in Lil Rod's civil suit. And this is in regards to Justin. I just want to touch on this one quick. That apparently there was a shooting at one of Diddy's recording studios years ago, and that Justin and Diddy apparently covered this up. Somebody was obviously shot and injured in this incident. There were reports on it, but not in relation to either of those two. Is this something that the feds would pursue? I mean, I know that the main part of the case is these sexual assault allegations, but could they head down that road toward attempted murder with a gunshot wound?
Potentially, and I've gotten this question a lot with respect to obviously the killing of Tupac, both in 1996 and the attempted murder in 1994. And a lot of people, I'm sure, watching believe that Combs, had something to do with that. I think it's challenging because then you start going in a very different direction, a rabbit hole. You're charging something that may be more difficult to prove, involving a shooting. You don't necessarily have the victim who's there testifying. And, you know, what I've seen from U.S. Attorney Damian Williams, and not just this case, and others as well, for instance, how he's handling the New York Mayor Eric Adams case, he is really keeping the surgical, he's keeping the charges narrow. That's why we're not seeing a kitchen sink approach. And sometimes we see that from prosecutors, for instance, in the Young Thug YSL case, everyone is being charged, right? Lots of different defendants, lots of different charges going, spanning over years. I don't think that's something that we're going to see here. I can't see that this prosecutor is going to charge things that aren't very easy to prove, because of that, when you start creating potential doubt, even though these are very serious allegations, obviously murder, attempted murder, we're talking about Tupac probably being the greatest rapper of our lifetime. I don't think this is something that we're going to see added to the charges in this case, because I think this specific prosecutor wants to keep things very narrow and very surgical.
So unclear about all this, whether any charges, if and when they could be added. But if we're talking about the defense now, switching to their side of things, I'm sure obviously they're talking to Diddy, but I'm wondering about their conversations with Christian and Justin. Do you think that the defense attorneys, their team, would be reaching out to both of them to talk and kind of bulk up Diddy's side of the case?
Sure, I'm sure that anyone who's a witness, whether it's a family member or someone else who was there, really needs a lawyer, because they may get subpoenaed, they may have to testify at trial or before the grand jury. Now, of course, everyone has the right to remain silent, and they can invoke if there's any criminal liability. But ultimately, everyone's going to need their own lawyers because there's a potential conflict. Obviously, Combs and Christian, they have financial means. They're going to have their own lawyers. But I mean, no question, whether it's a family member, whether it's a celebrity, whether it's someone who was a witness, just happened to be there, there's the possibility that they're contacted by law enforcement, HSI, and other federal agents. So they should have a lawyer, and they need to make a decision whether they're going to remain silent, cooperate, or do something else.
And now it's important to know that all three of these people we're talking about today, Diddy, Justin Combs, Christian Combs, have denied all of these allegations against them. So that's important to talk about. But also, we do still have that civil suit specifically against Christian Combs here. But where does all of that land now that we have Diddy, who's been indicted Federally, he's facing these charges, but the civil suits, are they now kind of taking a back seat?
That's absolutely right, Sierra. What's going to happen is they're going to be stayed to the extent that Diddy is a defendant, because we know that there is a right to remain silent in a criminal case. Obviously, civil lawsuit, you don't have that same right, but you can potentially say something in a civil case that can be a problem in a criminal case. We saw that with Bill Cosby, of course. He was accused of sexual assault in a civil case. He made statements, and those were used against him in a criminal prosecution. So oftentimes, when you have civil and criminal cases at the same time, the civil case will be stayed or put on hold while the criminal process plays out. And that's what I expect to happen here.
Diddy has pleaded not guilty to all the charges against him, and after his arrest, his attorney Mark Agnifilo released a statement reading in part, quote, Sean Diddy Combs is a music icon, self-made entrepreneur, loving family man, and proven philanthropist who spent the last 30 years building an empire, adoring his children, and working to uplift the Black community. He is an imperfect person, but is not criminal. To his credit, Mr. Combs has been nothing but cooperative with the investigation. Please reserve your judgment until you have all the facts. These are the acts of an innocent man with nothing to hide, and he looks forward to clearing his name in court. Right now, Diddy's federal trial is scheduled for May of 2025, but ahead of that, he's due back in court on December 18th. For Law&Crime, I'm Sierra Gillespie.